Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you. If you are new to this study, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be concluding our look at Matthew chapter 16. We'll begin with verse 21. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Matthew chapter 16, beginning with verse 21. Grab something to take some good notes with. Grab a beverage, grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that your week's been going well. Happy Thursday. Good to be with you here again this evening as we continue our journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. Rainy day here in Nebraska today. I pray that wherever you are at, that you're enjoying your day, that you're able to get out, enjoy maybe some sunshine or whatever may be taking place. We have folks from all over the country joining in our study, both live and at different times recorded, and so it's just a joy to be with you here to learn, to discern, to walk through the Bible together, one chapter at a time. And we're going to wrap up chapter 16 tonight of Matthew's Gospel. And just to recap what we looked at last night, a long in-depth study last night. The first part of Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 through 20, we saw Jesus now in this encounter with the Sadducees and the Pharisees from Jerusalem, these higher level religious leaders who challenged him, give us a sign from heaven of who you are. And Jesus told them essentially, you've received all the signs you're going to get. The only sign you're going to get now is the death and the resurrection that is to come. And then Jesus withdrew. We saw that he went to Caesarea Philippi, about 40 miles north of Jerusalem, about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, very distant from both the Jewish territory and the religious leaders. And he's in this pagan Gentile area, and he asks, who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am? And Peter correctly answers, you are the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Son of the living God. And Jesus commends him for what he has to say, that I'm now going to establish my church, right? The plan has changed. Israel has rejected their Messiah. This imminent coming of the kingdom is going to be delayed, but in the meantime, Christ is going to establish his church not to replace the Messianic kingdom, but as an addition to, now including the Gentile believers. And now we're going to wrap up this chapter, and Jesus is really going to start to explain now what's going to come. All the opposition has climaxed at this point. It started with the people, and it worked its way up now to these high-level leaders from Jerusalem, and now the journey is going to shift. Now he's going to begin his journey back towards Jerusalem, and he's going to share this new revelation with his disciples about his death and his resurrection. And not a long study tonight. There's only a few chapters, so this will be a shorter study, but there's still so much in this chapter 16. So open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 16. If you don't have a Bible, not a problem. We'll put all the verses up here on the screen, and again, we're going to start with verse 21. And now that Jesus has given this revelation about his church, he's going to go even further, and he's going to tell his disciples about his coming death and his resurrection. So verse 21. From that time on, now this is the only only the second time in Matthew's gospel that he uses these words. The first time was in chapter 4, verse 17. And this is chapter 4, where Jesus presented himself to Israel as the Messiah. Here, this phrase is announcing Jesus' preparation of his disciples for the reality of the cross. Israel's rejection of the Messiah is going to lead to the crucifixion. So from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples, now here's what's going to happen. He has to go to Jerusalem, suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and we'll talk about that in a second, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. This is signaling a major turning point in Jesus' ministry. Now, he's hinting at his crucifixion and his death. Now, Jesus had hinted at his death earlier in Matthew's Gospel, in chapter 9, verse 15, chapter 10, verse 38, chapter 12, verse 40. But this is the first time that he's really discussing it like this with his disciples. And he begins to point out, or he begins to explain, is how I have it here in the NIV, but it depends on your translation. From that time on, Jesus began to point out, or he began to explain the necessity of what is to come, his suffering, his death, his resurrection. He's going to explain these things like never before, and he says it is necessary that he must go to Jerusalem. He had to do this because this was God's will for the Messiah, to suffer, to die, to be buried, to raise from the dead. Doing that as the Messiah fulfilled the prophecy through Isaiah, specifically Isaiah chapter 53. So I have to go do this. Now, Jesus identifies three groups of people that are going to be responsible for his suffering and his death: the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. And as I mentioned, when the Sadducees and the Pharisees were introduced together, that comprised the Sanhedrin. This is the same thing. This is the supreme governing religious body of Israel, the Sanhedrin, the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, these high-level leaders. The way that this is written, there's one definite article. It's not the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law. This is one single entity as it's written in the Greek text. And this is going to be Israel's final official rejection and their most formal official rejection of their Messiah. So Jesus is announcing that this mock trial is going to take place. I must go to Jerusalem, and there I will be tried. I'm going to suffer many things at this false trial. And I'll be sentenced to die, and I'll be executed, I'll be crucified, I'll be buried, but then I will rise from the dead on the third day. And we've talked about that third day before. In Hebrew, it's not 3 full days. The third day can mean part of the first day, the second day, and part of the third day, which is what we see. The death on Friday, part of Friday, all of Saturday, part of Sunday, 3 days. So now what we're going to see next is this announcement that accompanies that announcement of the resurrection that should have some type of an impression on the disciples. Because apparently here the thought of him dying upset them so much that they didn't want to hear the rest of what he was going to say. And so he announces also with his death, his resurrection, right, to give them hope. They're going to fail to grasp all this. but he's still providing this information so that they come to some type of an understanding of it. Now, Peter, verse 22, hears all this. He takes Jesus aside and he begins to rebuke him. And he says, never, Lord, God forbid this, right? This shall never happen to you. Now, previously, Peter made a statement about Jesus. We saw that in the first part of chapter 16. You are the Messiah, right? And so, the prophecy in Isaiah 53 is that the Messiah should suffer these things. But Peter, he understands this prediction of death, but he's going to rebuke Jesus for it in private, right? Peter takes Jesus aside and rebukes him, but Jesus is going to cut him off, and we're going to see that here in verse 23. Peter's understanding of Jesus as Messiah in the first part of chapter 16 apparently didn't include Jesus as a suffering servant. And he's not alone here. Everybody else in Israel rejected this, that Jesus is the Messiah, the suffering servant. Peter is not wanting to accept what is not agreeing with his ambitions or his hopes or his preconceived idea of who Jesus is. And he's not just rebuking Jesus here. He's using a very strong expression in the Greek. The word never, that word in the Greek is rarely mentioned in the New Testament. This is a very strong negative expression that Peter is giving. He just gave his great confession, verse 16, of who Jesus is. Now he gives a great contradiction. What you have said, Lord, is not true. So Jesus cuts him off. He turns to Peter, verse 23, and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter pulls Jesus aside, rebukes him. Jesus turns to meet him face to face and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now that doesn't mean he's calling Peter Satan. What it means is, don't stand in my way as an adversary. Remember, the word Satan means adversary. When Jesus rebuked Satan himself in chapter 4, when he was tempted in the wilderness, he said, get behind me, Satan. What he's saying to Peter is, don't be a stumbling block, right? I just called you the rock. That my church, I'm going to build my church on this rock, and you, Peter, are going to play a very important part in it. Now you're becoming a stumbling block to me. Get behind me, Satan. You are becoming a stumbling block. Now you're no longer a rock. Now you're a stumbling rock. Satan offered Jesus messiahship without suffering. That goes back to chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Peter is offering the same thing. You don't have to do this, Lord, right? You don't have to be the suffering servant. And so this whole idea of the Messiah suffering is causing Peter to stumble. And so what Jesus is saying is, don't try to cause me to stumble. You're getting in my way. After the resurrection, the same thing's going to happen. Many of the Jews stumble. They're not grasping the resurrection of Christ. It still causes people to stumble today. Jesus continues, you don't have in mind the concerns of God. What's in your mind are human concerns. So Peter's not thinking God's thoughts, but man's thoughts. When Peter confessed that Jesus is the Messiah, in verse 16 that we looked at last night, he was thinking God thoughts, right? And Jesus told him, this didn't come from any mere mortal man. This came from God. Now, Peter's not having God thoughts. He, like Satan, is having these worldly thoughts about who Jesus should be. And so Jesus is going to take all this interaction and he's going to proceed to clarify what's involved in being a disciple of Christ. He just explained what was involved in the Messiahship. Now he's going to explain what's involved in discipleship. And what that is just as Jesus dies as disciples, that means dying to self. Where the hope comes is rejoicing in the assurance that eventually this kingdom, this messianic kingdom on earth is going to come. Glory would follow the suffering. And when we get to Peter's letters, First Peter really shows an emphasis on this point of dying to self as a disciple. So Peter is going to learn this lesson well over time, but right now he's struggling with this. So verse 24, then Jesus says to his disciples, right now he's going to address all of them. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. Discipleship requires self-denial in the most fundamental areas of our lives. And what Jesus says here, it isn't just for the 12, it applies to anybody who really wants to follow him. The Jews had renounced Jesus. Jesus is saying, you wanting to be my disciples must renounce yourselves. You must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Now, the Romans would customarily compel someone to carry part of the cross. When you were condemned to death through crucifixion, the Romans would make you carry at least part of the cross to the site of the crucifixion. What that did was it gave a public testimony that the condemned was submissive to the authority of Rome, right? You died by crucifixion because you opposed Rome. So the Romans would make you carry part of your cross to the crucifixion site to say, this person opposed me, but they are under my, they are submissive to my authority. That would have been a humiliation to the Jew. Jesus is saying, as a disciple, you have to do the same thing. Take up your cross. Declare your submission, not to the Romans, but to me, to the one, to the Messiah that you had previously rebelled against. Now, Jesus isn't explicitly identifying the method of his death yet. By saying take up your cross, he's not implying that's how he's going to die. That will come in chapter 20. But the disciples, they at least understood, at least in part, what Jesus is saying about paying the price as a disciple. He's talking about self-denial. And self-denial, as Jesus taught it, doesn't just mean denying ourselves of things, right? Like I'm going to give up eating processed food, or I'm going to give up eating ice cream, or I'm going to give up going out bar hopping. That is not denying self. Denying self means denying your authority over your own life. That's the great challenge. To deny self is to deny our authority over ourselves and declare that authority belongs to Christ alone. Dying to self is not necessarily a prerequisite to discipleship, but it is a characteristic of it. And the verbs in this challenge are very significant. The first two, to deny and to take up, those indicate a decisive action. To follow indicates a continuing action. So when Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciples must deny themselves, take up their cross, those are decisive actions. And then follow me. That's a continuing action. That means every moment, of every day throughout our life, saying no to self, saying yes to God. Verse 25. For, and this word for, when it appears in Jesus' dialogue like this, it means he's giving a logical argument for what he just said. So you have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross. You have to follow me, because whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me will find it. And this verse restates the idea that Jesus previously expressed in chapter 10, verse 28. Now, the Greek word for life doesn't just mean our physical life from birth to death. It means our soul. It means our whole being, right? And the point of this statement is that living for self results in a leaner life later. Living or denying oneself and living for God results in a fuller life later. So you can live for all the things in the world now, but it's not going to last. Or you can deny yourself and live this life that could be full of struggle, but in the end, it's going to come to a full life. It definitely pays to follow Christ, but that payday will come at a later time. For the disciples, the later is the inauguration of the kingdom on earth. We'll see that in a moment in verse 27. Verse 26, for what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world but forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? So these are two rhetorical questions that show the foolishness of trying to earn great material wealth at the expense of one's life. And again, that word life means soul. Your whole existence, your entire being. What good does it do to acquire material wealth and forsake yourself? For the world, there's immediate gain, right? We can get all the immediate gains that we strive for, but in the end, it's an ultimate loss. For the disciple, there's immediate loss, right, in the near term, but we have ultimate gain. Verse 27, for, right, here's his argument, for the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. God's future judgment. It should be a means of inducing us to deny self, identify with Christ, and follow him. Jesus is going to come again. And when we get to the book of Revelation and at the church this Sunday, we're going to show a movie about this, the coming of Christ, right? But Revelation 19, Jesus will return, and he will return in the glory of his Father, and he will return with his angels who will enhance that glory and will assist Jesus in gathering up the flock, the people, for judgment, meaning that even the angels are under the authority of Christ. And at that future time, God will reward each person according to their conduct, according to their deeds. We will be judged, right? Conduct demonstrates character. So again, what Jesus is talking about here is the reward through discipleship when you deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Christ. That reward will come at the future day of the Messianic kingdom coming. Now, both Jesus and Paul as well urged, Paul especially in his letters, urged those who listen or those who read it today. And Jesus made this point too. Lay up your treasures in heaven. Make investments in something that will yield eternal rewards, not just short-term gains. And it's perfectly legitimate to remind people of the consequences of their actions in order to be a motivating factor to do what is right. That's exactly what Jesus is doing here with his disciples. Deny yourself, pick up your cross, follow me. Your reward will be great in heaven. What good does it do you now to gain all the wealth in the world but surrender your soul? Don't do that, right? Deny yourself. Accept me as full authority. Take up your cross as I will. Live your life following my example. And in the end, you will receive your reward. And so Jesus is now going to end here by revealing even more about the Messianic kingdom to his inner circle here, these 12 disciples, in order to strengthen their faith and to prepare them for the trials and testing of that faith that is going to lay ahead of them. So verse 28, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So what Jesus is doing here is he's revealing that some of the disciples who he's talking to would not die until they saw him coming in his kingdom. Now this sounds very similar to the prediction Jesus gave in chapter 10, verse 23. But this verse in chapter 10, verse 23, it refers to Jesus' reunion with his disciples following their preaching tour in Galilee. This verse doesn't mean that Jesus returned somewhere to set up the Messianic kingdom during the lifetime of the disciples. That did not happen. He had already begun the Messianic kingdom when he spoke about these words. But what he's doing here is Jesus is predicting the preview of his coming to establish his earthly kingdom, which he gave to Peter, James, and John in the Transfiguration, which we will see in chapter 17. Jesus is announcing he's going to build his church. Chapter 16, verse 18. And then he's going to come again and bring this promised kingdom. That's what he's saying here, that this kingdom is going to come. You're going to see a preview of this. I tell you, some here who are standing here will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. This is going to be seen by Peter, James, and John in the Transfiguration that we'll see in chapter 17. So when you see this verse, chapter 16, verse 28, this is all speaking of the coming, the Transfiguration. And that's what we will look at tomorrow. But that is the conclusion of Matthew chapter 16, and I pray that that has been a help to you. There is so much in that chapter. We spent 2 nights in it, over an hour, right? Almost an hour and a half studying that chapter between last night and tonight. So go back, reread it, recheck your notes, check your commentaries, check your footnotes in your Bibles. Really dive in because there's so much in there. At this point, Jesus is making his way to Jerusalem, knowing of what is to come, and he's trying to prepare his disciples that when they follow him after his resurrection, they need to be ready to experience these same things. So thank you for being here this evening. Again, I do appreciate you being here, and I pray that this has been a help to you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you again. Till then, take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.